Welcome to the Climate Change Panel, 4th of March. The agenda, apologies for absence. We've got a couple of apologies today, haven't we? Oh yes, I've got to do this beforehand. This very, very important. Fire evacuation. There's no planned fire alarm scheduled at this time. Therefore, should the fire alarm go off, please make your way out of the building via the nearest fire exits there to the car park beside the Windmill Public House. And then microphones. Please ensure that the microphone directly in front of you is switched on and logged in. Please do not move the microphone from its set position, and when speaking, ensure the microphone is directly in front of you and not to the side or up high. Thank you very much. And moving on to the agenda then, we've got the apologies. We do have some apologies for absence. Would you like to just let them know?
Yes, good afternoon, panel and chair. We have apologies from Councillor Pertigella.
Councillor Pertigella is meeting a school group down in the House of Commons, which is quite an interesting... we'll have to ask her how that went afterwards. Disclosures of interest. Have we got any disclosures of interest other than those that have already been recorded before? No fresh ones. Okay. And the standard disclosures as well. I've got some of the standard disclosures there on the written down the agenda. No fresh ones. Okay. Now the next item is the minutes. The last meeting was on the 7th of January, and we had the minutes of that meeting. Does anybody have any questions or queries to ask about that meeting, about the minutes at all that you want to raise? Therefore, can I have your permission to sign those minutes? Agreed? Okay, all agreed. Matters arising. The next item is from Warwickshire County Council, to receive an update on the Climate Change and Sustainability Programme from Warwickshire County Council. Welcome and looking forward to the presentation. Would you like to introduce yourself and then give us the presentation, please?
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you everyone for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. So I'm Sarah Steer, I'm Head of Climate Change and Sustainability at Warwickshire County Council. I've put together some slides which hopefully will be useful and I hope hit the mark. So yeah, without further ado, if I take you through those. Oh, not that one. That's a different meeting. Sorry, I put that in there earlier. So we published our strategy back in November 2023. That's when it went through our cabinet. That followed quite an extensive consultation exercise that involved many residents, communities, businesses. Hopefully yourselves were involved in that process as well. It predated my time, so some of the details of who's involved probably, I haven't got those to hand. I can't quite believe it's been way over a year since we published that strategy, and last week we took our first, we called it an annual report because it will be annual from this point onwards, annual report to our Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And at the end of this presentation, I can share with you details of where you can find that if you'd like some more detail. But what I've tried to do through this presentation is pull out some of those things in terms of what's happened and also where we're moving to in terms of the year ahead, which hopefully will be useful. So in terms of our strategy, it's quite a big document. It'd be amazing to know if you've all read it, but I suspect you're very busy. So if I could give you some of the potted highlights. So first and foremost, it's about making sure we have the right adaptations in place across the county, both in terms of our services and thinking about our communities to adapt to the climate changes that we know are already upon us, whether that's talking about flooding, whether that's talking about extreme heat or other climatic events. So there's something writ large within that strategy about our plans to take that forward. There is also, the other two key aspects of the strategy are about our net zero commitments. So the first is about us as an organisation and recognising that we have our own role to play. And we've made a commitment currently to achieve net zero by 2030. And the second is our role within the county and to help support and influence and lead potentially others to achieve net zero from a Warwickshire-wide perspective, so to achieve net zero 2050 for the county of Warwickshire. None of those things are mean tasks, and therefore there's a lot of detail within that strategy that talks about plans over a number of years to help support us in that direction. So if you have the time to look at the strategy, you'll kind of understand that it's organised into 5 themes. So we've got transport, built environment and energy, resources, waste and material recirculation, sustainable communities and green economy, and the last one's around natural capital. And I will go on to talk about those a little bit more as we go through the presentation. Accompanying the strategy is also an action plan, and you see there, it's just a snippet, just so you can kind of get a sense of what sort of things are in there, is Annex A, which is about delivering the strategy. And again, that's organised around those 5 themes, and within those themes, we think about our role as a council, our role within the county, and our role with respect to adaptation as well. So there's a series of actions, some of which are easier to do, and some of which are going to kind of take us a long time to get through. So here are some of the highlights of where we're up to so far. So when we think about Warwickshire as a county and achieving net zero by 2050, this chart represents where we're up to so far and some of the key changes that we've made. And this is the collective we, the royal we of Warwickshire as a county. I'm not for any minute taking credit for us having achieved this, but I think it's really important that we understand as residents, as businesses, as organisations within the county where we are on that journey. So you see from in there, transport plays a biggish role, the most significant role in terms of our emissions, followed closely by industry, then the domestic sector, and then we have other commercial, waste management, agriculture and public sector as a very small sliver at the top. You'll see the obvious dip around about 2020, 2021, and we all know what happened then. I think it was inevitable that we would see increases rise after that, but reassuringly, they've not achieved the same levels as they did pre-pandemic. So whilst we did see an increase, we're still maintaining roughly a downward trend. This is kind of for information really in context, because our strategy does cover us as a council as well in terms of our net zero progression. There's a lot of technical detail in here, but roughly what this is showing you is we are on a downward trajectory. We have got a long way to go as an organisation. The chart on the right-hand side starts to show where some of our achievements have been, I suppose, over the year in terms of emissions reductions. So we are seeing reductions in most areas. So the bar chart shows those the arrows above them show the downward trends, or conversely for scope 3, an upward trend. So those of you that are close to this will probably appreciate that the scope 3 emissions around the production of energy, which is somewhat outside of our control. So those have seen increases, and the way in which this is calculated, I'm not even going to pretend to get into that technical detail, because I've got Matt in my team who's really close to the generation of the emissions data, follows the guidance provided by the Climate Change Committee and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of factors that go into producing this data. But I think what's encouraging is that we can see downward trends against all the things that we have influence over, and probably less encouraging that the upstream energy for this year anyway is showing an increase in its emission factors. So if I go on to talk to you about some of the key themes that we've focused in on, and I talked about adaptation, and I know this one will be very close to your hearts within the district. So we know that we're seeing an increase in the prevalence of flooding in particular, but we've also over recent years seen extreme heat events as well. And so we've made investments in the county into supporting what adaptation might mean for us. We now have a dedicated adaptation officer who sits within my team. She's been working closely with Ellie in particular in Stratford, but also across all the districts and boroughs, bringing together colleagues from across the county to kind of develop a cohort of adaptation expertise, to share information and knowledge, and hopefully in the next steps to think about actually what we might be able to do together in that space, which I think will be really valuable. And as well as having all the districts and boroughs represented on that group, we've also got interest from the NHS to be involved. And actually Coventry City, I know are a bit further away from here, but are also involved in being part of that group because they see a value in working together. Across the year, the role of adaptation officer is relatively new, so we've been embedding that in the organisation to understand how Offa can support services. So we've focused on a number of our priority services to help them understand the risks that they're facing around climate, to help them understand how they manage those risks, how they plan for those risks, how they can start to develop their own adaptation plans within services. So we've started to do that and started to roll that out, particularly around some of our transport functions with highways, etc., with fire and rescue, with public health. But actually there's a long way to go with that, and we're encouraged by some of the work that we've done, but we know there's a lot more in that space that we would like to do. We've also this year participated in the DEFRA Local Authority Adaptation Reporting Pilot. So many of you might be aware that there is a national process around climate change risk assessments and national adaptation programme, and for the first time in this round, local authorities have been asked to participate in that. So we've submitted a report which you can actually find on our website, not quite yet, but it will be published in the next few weeks, that just kind of sweeps together the risks that we think are facing Warwickshire, so that actually for the first time they'll be hopefully represented within that bigger national picture in terms of planning, etc. In the year ahead, we kind of want to do more of that. We want to do more of working with partners across the county. We want to do more around our own services and kind of thinking about those that we should be prioritising. But we also have just kicked off a piece of work around flood resilience and really want to kind of do some stuff in that space, working across a number of services. During our first year of delivering on the strategy, we've seen behaviour change and comms being a really important part of what we do. We recognise that certainly I'm a team of about 3 or 4 of us. We're not very big at all, but we recognise that across the council and across the county, the impact that we can all play if we work together is massive. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about how we work with senior colleagues, certainly across the county council, to kind of pick off in some respects those that we think are going to have the most impact, whether that's around assets, whether it's around the services that they provide. And so since last March, we've been delivering, wrapped up in the Carbon Literate programme, we've been delivering carbon literacy to senior leaders across the organisation, and our portfolio holder has been through that process, and we're hopeful that post-election we will take our new member cohort through that in different ways as well. Through that, we've trained a number of senior officers and key teams, and that's enabled us to become a carbon literate bronze organisation. I don't think we'll ever become anything more than a bronze organisation, because actually the proportion of our workforce that we would need to have accredited to become silver, it doesn't feel tenable due to the size of our workforce. It's quite a high proportion. We've also had focus sessions with our senior leadership forum, where we've had a whole half day on sustainability, which has really helped us to think about the role of adaptation, the role of mitigation, recognising that most services occupy buildings, most services move around the county in some way, so they all have their roles to play. And that's been a really useful exercise. And we've also been working with staff across the organisation to establish an annual sustainability staff survey. So it helps us gauge where our staff are and plan to that, and help support them in their own journey. In the year ahead, we'll continue with that rollout, and we'll continue with our comms that that we deliver on a county-wide basis. We've been liaising quite a bit with different officers in districts and boroughs in that space as well, and we've certainly done quite a lot in the Stratford area with a number of organisations or officers and that kind of stuff around things like podcasts and member newsletters. We've worked quite a lot with the Stratford Eco Hub and others, so we want to continue to see that be really strong in the year ahead. Howard suggested transport would be something that would be of particular interest. Unsurprisingly, I guess, as 40% of our emissions across the county are attributed to transport. We set out in our strategy that we do want to have this ambition of surface transport across the county with zero carbon, minimal air quality emissions, and that we'll achieve this through sustainable modes of transport, thinking about how residents access zero carbon transport options, as well as encouraging active travel. I know that's a great ambition. There's a lot of detail that needs to go in front of that before we get to that point. And the local transport plan is the mechanism by which we will look to deliver on that agenda. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So in terms of where we are, this is the sort of scores on the doors, if you like, that we had within our annual report around transport. So I mentioned already that 40% of our emissions come from transport. And you can see that the table there on the right-hand side, we've got a number of these as we go through the presentation. These are what we said we'd report on through our Sustainable Futures strategy. So you can see that, obviously, again, you see that COVID dip in the 2020-21 year around transport, where we definitely saw a decrease in transport, which we've then seen a steady increase. That was actually a 21% decrease in COVID, but our current emissions are around about 8.5% lower than they were in 2019. So again, it just shows it's not gone up to where we would like it to. It's not gone up as far as it was before, which is a good thing. What's quite interesting is if you start to get into the detail of that 40%, that includes motorway traffic as well. Obviously, that's harder to influence from our perspectives as local authorities. And motorway transport hasn't seen any reduction since 2005 in terms of emissions. So that's remained pretty stagnant, and it accounts for 45% of our transport, which is a lot higher than if you compare it to other counties or other parts of the country. So I think nationally, 22% of all transport emissions is associated with motorway traffic, but in Warwickshire it is 45%. So there's something there to bear in mind. If you took the same period from 2005, we've actually seen a 15% reduction in non-motorway traffic during the same period. So motorway emissions have stayed constant, non-motorway have dropped by 15%. So there are some positives there. In terms of some of the notable activity that we've been doing this year, Local Transport Plan 4, there's a lot of work been going on with my transport planning colleagues around the area strategies and implementation plans. And I know that they're expected to be rolled out at some point later this year. There's been a lot going on in the EV charging space, and many of you will be aware that we've had funding at county level for the Levi Fund, and I can't quite remember the acronym, somebody might remind me, but that's bringing in 3.3 million to support that rollout, to support the infrastructure, etc. And I think that's about to go out to procurement if it hasn't already gone out to procurement at the moment. There's also been money come into the county from a number of sources that's committed up to 13.94 million towards zero emission buses across the county. We've published the bus service improvement plan, and we've also seen a lot more schools sign up for safe and active travel. So in the year ahead, we do expect to see those local transport plan area strategies and implementation plans come to the fore. and we do expect to see more, further progression of those EV strategies and zero emission bus programmes. In terms of built environment and energy, that also makes up a significant part of the emissions across the county. So if you see the pie chart to the left there, everything that's sort of in the colourful right-hand side to the bottom somehow has an impact in terms of built environment and energy, whether we're talking about industry, commerce, domestic houses, public sector, etc. So it's still a big chunk of the overall emissions for the county. You can see from the chart on the right-hand side, which I could do with making bigger on my screen, that we've seen a continued increase in the installation of renewable energy in Warwickshire. Be interesting to see how that increases over time, and I'm sure there are benefits that will come from that. Interesting, I think the middle row is quite interesting to see the year-on-year decrease in terms of emissions from Warwickshire homes, and that's despite the fact that we have seen population increases over the same period, so we must bear that in mind as well. And also interesting to see that we again have seen continued decreases around emissions from Warwickshire businesses as well. In terms of some of the notable activity that we've done this year, the big one for me is around local area energy planning. So this was quite a cornerstone of what we talked about within our Sustainable Futures strategy. I've learned a lot about local area energy planning, which if you'd asked me 12, 18 months ago, I wouldn't have known a lot about. But for those, and I hope I'm not teaching you to suck eggs when I talk about it, but local area energy plan is essentially taking an area, and it doesn't have to be county level, it could be district level or what have you, and thinking about, actually, if we took that area, what's the current energy need and demand based on our current population and developments, etc. Understanding, therefore, what that energy demand might look like in the future based on developments that we know about through our local plans, that kind of thing. What we might know about because of technology developments. Let's imagine everybody's got a solar panel on their house, an EV charger on their drive, and various other things. That will suddenly put demands on the energy infrastructure that we need to resolve. The conclusion of a local area energy plan is essentially understanding where your demands are, understanding where your constraints will be for those energy demands, and therefore planning. Oh, that's gone off. Is that better? Yeah. Planning to resolve those challenges, which could be from a range of things. From my perspective, my interest obviously comes from sustainability, and the solution isn't necessarily more and more energy, but actually how do we make that more local, community energy, renewable energy, that kind of stuff. But there'll be a number of actions within that mix that are important. Now, we've been fortunate to have had access to the West Midlands Combined Authority pilot project called PRIDE. I can't quite remember what it stands for, but they've been funded by National Grid to essentially use a mapping tool that's already pre-populated with a lot of information about energy consumption across the patch. Last week, we were onboarded onto that pilot, which means we now have access to a Warwickshire base of energy consumption, which is really the first step in us being able to deliver on a local area energy plan. So that's quite exciting for us and the team, and we certainly want to do that in conjunction with district and borough colleagues, and we've been talking to Ellie in particular about that, and in fact we've got a meeting next week in terms of next steps. I think there is something about the tool and how districts and borough colleagues can access that and the benefits that you might gain from it beyond just the energy space. I think it's certainly got a role to play in development and planning and that kind of stuff, so it'll be interesting, I think, once you can kind of get your hands on it and have a bit of a play with it to see the opportunities it might bring. We welcomed the Warwick District Planning document, and I know that's something that came up in the South Warwickshire Plan, I think, so it's something that is perhaps being considered in Stratford. And we also were pleased that we've had 50 schools sign up to our Eco Schools programme. But significantly, I think that the work that we've been doing with schools isn't just about us working with schools, but we've joined up with Let's Go Zero, for example, and a number of council services who are also working with schools to understand actually how do we do this in a more effective way, so we're not all knocking on the same doors, and actually through resources such as Let's Go Zero, there's an opportunity to support schools in their journey to sustainability. In terms of the year ahead, I think the work that we do around local area energy planning will be very important. And one of the next steps is to really kind of seriously motor on the stakeholder engagement piece around this. If anybody's interested in more details on local area energy planning, there is, I think, a particularly marvellous manual that the Energy Catapult have produced, and it is literally a manual on how to do a local area energy plan. So they've literally scoped it out stage by stage by stage, and stakeholder engagement is such an important part of everything that they do. So hopefully with the support of Midlands Net Zero, we will be starting to really motor on that aspect of it next. And we will also work with at least another 50 schools through the Eco Schools programme. Bear with me. Oh, there we go. Our next theme within the strategy is resources, waste and materials recirculation. There's a lot that goes on in that space. In terms of its contribution to overall emissions in Warwickshire, it's quite a small amount. You can see that 5% at the top on the right-hand side there. There's probably a lot that's already talked about in this space through the waste partnership and that kind of stuff. So I probably won't dwell on that anymore, but happy to share slides afterwards if that's helpful. And we know, of course, there's some changes coming in the year ahead, particularly around regulation and what that might mean. But we're also interested in developing our approach to material recirculation. That's a term that we've coined within the Sustainable Futures strategy. Some might kind of better understand it as circular economy. So thinking about what does that mean for us, not only in terms of our residents, but what does it mean in terms of our businesses? And I think really thinking through where our value add is and how that relates to those other authorities that are around us, particularly when we're thinking about the business space and where our businesses don't necessarily think about any borders that exist across the region potentially. So the fourth theme is around sustainable communities and green economy. A bit like the previous slide, this covers quite a lot of different aspects, including agriculture as well. There's a lot of work that goes on in this space that covers such a wide range of areas, and this is described in more detail in the annual report if you did want to refer to it. So I've just kind of tried to give you a bit of a flavour here. We did publish our strategic economic plan last year, and it has only 3 pillars within it, and one of which is absolutely about sustainable business. So that is a really important aspect for us in terms of how we work with our business community. And we're really pleased that we've been able to continue to support the Business Energy Advice Service. This is something that's been funded through, if I get this right, I think it's through UK SPF and through BEIS over the last year or so, and it's engaged over 400 businesses and provided over £640,000 in grants to support energy efficiency within those businesses. So that's proper hands-on support for those businesses across Warwickshire. We've also introduced green business podcasts, so as well as the Sustainable Warwickshire podcast, there's podcasts that go out on the business community that are focused on particular issues that are relevant to businesses in Warwickshire. We have a network of food champions, as I know Olivia's probably aware of from the Food Forum, and we do absolutely see them having a real role, particularly in terms of that sustainability angle and thinking about food for life, growing food, not wasting food, so many other things. And I think as a route to a wider communications piece, I think that's also really important. We've been working a lot with WOLC as well over the last year. We kind of really do see a role for the town and parish councils in that influencing space, and so have funded WOLC to develop their own capacity to deliver carbon literacy across the town and parish council network, because we kind of thought that would be a good way of beginning them on a journey. In terms of some of the priorities in the year ahead around this area, we aspire to engage our businesses with the biggest emissions who we don't think have currently declared publicly that they're on a sustainability journey. What I would say is, of the work that we've done so far of reviewing where we think our biggest emitting businesses are, the vast majority of them are absolutely on a journey towards sustainability, which is really reassuring. But there are a couple on that list that if they are on that journey, it's been less obvious. So we want to make sure that we're engaging with them over the course of the year ahead. There will be a session at UK Reef, which is an inward investment conference, for want of a better word, that will focus on sustainability and energy. And Warwickshire will have an opportunity to host that panel as part of the broader regional input, I think, at that event. And we'll continue to look at how we can use other investment funds to see if there's opportunities to sort of have a focus on sustainability around what we do. What I haven't talked about sorry, I'll go back. What I haven't talked about in this last slide, but I should have probably drawn it out a little bit, is community engagement. And one of the real opportunities for us around community engagement is how we use not only our communities and partnerships team, but also our libraries. And we've certainly had national funding through the National Portfolio Organisation funding from the Arts Council to support aspects of sustainability. And there's been some real success over the last year or so through that particular approach. And that will move ahead into the next year ahead. And they're just going out for some sort of creative commissions that are very linked to sustainability. And there'll be some green library roadshows and all that kind of stuff. So we do see the library network being really important in our community engagement piece. The last theme is natural capital and biodiversity. And you wouldn't expect me not to have something in here about that. There's a lot going on in this space. Many of you will be engaged with things like the local nature recovery strategy and various other things. So there's a lot that's still kind of being taken forward. Some of the data on the left-hand side includes some of the things around nature-based solutions and how that's contributing to carbon storage within the county. This is nationally available data, which you'll see that you can kind of, it varies from year to year. And we have a commitment to plant a number of trees, which we are slowly moving along that target. Notably, what we've done in the last year or so is we have received some external funding to plant some of those trees. We've established a tree nursery, which happens to be in the Stratford district area, over at Snitterfield. And we've got a new tree gang to support the planting of those trees. One of the challenges that we have is identifying some reasonable blocks of land to plant those on, and that's something that we're working through at the moment. We published our natural capital investment strategy, and that kind of helps us understand what we do in that biodiversity net gain piece. And we've also achieved responsible body status that allows us to create conservation covenants. So in the year ahead, we hope to publish our tree and woodland strategy, establish some of those conservation covenants with landowners, deliver our first woodland carbon code scheme, fingers crossed. As I mentioned, identify the land to support a tree planting commitment, and hopefully we want to finalise our offsetting plan as well to help us with that 2030 ambition. So if I just conclude with this last slide, which is just really more details that you guys can have a peruse at your leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. That really is, you know, I look forward to, could we have a copy of the slides sent to us? As well as the strategy, we can have a look at those key issues that were raised. Before I ask anybody else, perhaps I could start with a couple of questions, if you don't mind. One is the simpler recycling. I know that new regulations are coming in so that March the 31st, for most businesses, they have to now recycle in 4 items, 4 separate items. But the micro businesses are not due to come in until 2027. I'm just wondering whether what help the county council can give, because a lot of those micro businesses don't have the support network that they need with their commercial waste collectors to be able to separate out. And yet they could be subject to fines. Just wondering what the county council and the district council, you're the waste disposal, we're the waste collectors, but we're not commercial waste collectors. What we can do to get that messages across to businesses, and also about more the getting engaged in circular economy. The bigger ones, it's easier for, but it's the micro businesses that are going to find it the most difficult. And the other one that I could ask a question about is the business energy advice, because I had picked up that not many companies within Stratford District Council area have actually been able to take advantage of that business energy advice. I may be wrong, but if you could let me know perhaps afterwards what percentage of businesses have been able to access that advice, and maybe what we could do to let people know that the business energy advice is there to help. Those are 2 starter questions, if you don't mind me leading.
I don't mind at all, and I hope I'm not going to be a jack of all trades and master of none with your questions. In terms of the recycling point, I think Andrew Powell, if he was here, would be able to give a very eloquent response, and I wouldn't want to talk on his behalf. So if Chair, you don't mind, I'll take that away and have the conversation with Andrew and come back to you.
And please give my regards to him, because I knew him from previous.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
please.
absolutely. And in terms of the energy advice service, I should have done my research before I came and known how many Stratford businesses had taken it up, but that'll be relatively easy for me to do when I get back. And I'm sure there's something in the comm space that we can then work on if we feel it's not very proportionate and there's still opportunities out there. So I'll take that away if that's okay.
And the same with the energy advice, you'll get back to me. And the final question before I bring everybody else in is the Climate Change Committee has just done its 7th budget. I do believe there is some things in there that are applicable to local authorities. Perhaps again we need to make sure that we are, both the District Council and the County Council are aware of what the Climate Change Committee is saying, and make sure that we are doing what they agree, what they've said in their budget that we ought to be doing. But that's probably for you to follow up afterwards. I've got Councillor Crump.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Judith. Yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, first of all, I'm probably need to declare that I'm a Warwickshire County Councillor, and have seen this strategy came in, I think it was 2023, as Sarah said. It could be 24 because the years roll into one. So I'd declare an interest. And the couple of areas she did mention was fire and rescue, which is my portfolio. And yeah, we're definitely using things, electric pump, for example, particularly during fires or removing smoke from fires. The way we're collecting runoff and stopping pollution, that's another thing that I think we can link in as well. Pollution as well is another factor, and I've got the flooding as portfolio as well. The only other thing, again, perhaps for you, Sarah, is the business energy scheme. Aren't we doing that with Coventry City Council? Our Coventry City Council doing it on behalf of us and the districts and boroughs? And this, I think, I seem to remember something to do about the Growth Hub as well. So if you could just give us a bit more on that, I might be rambling on, but I thought that was my recollections. But as the Queen once said, recollections may vary.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We do it in conjunction with Coventry City. I think we tendered it actually as an exercise, and Coventry happened to win the contract. So they are delivering it as a contractor, as a commission service, but they do that across Coventry and Warwickshire. So yeah, you are correct.
Oh, good. I'm glad this is being recorded, so I can say at least the officers said I was correct about something. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Has anybody else got any questions that they want to raise? Councillor Petrovic.
Yeah, great, thank you. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you have gone about measuring Scope 3 emissions, because I know in the previous meeting we talked with Ellie, our officer, as well, about how challenging that is, and actually looking at best practice of other councils who have grappled with the same issue and have managed to successfully start measuring the Scope 3 emissions as well. Thank you.
So in truth, we, with the exception of those downstream emissions that were in that one of those charts that I showed you, they are the only Scope 3 that we've included that are part of the calculation. But we haven't looked, you know, if we're talking about other supply chains, we haven't gone down that route yet. I'm sure over time that will come, but yeah, we've got enough, I think, to deal with for now. But yeah, we haven't done that.
Anybody else? Any other? Councillor, anybody else? Councillor Hatch first then.
Hi, Sarah. I suppose my question is that the graph that you showed is going down quite slowly, really, and it's not going to hit zero at 2030. I just sort of to tie into that, a couple of the graphs, the bus passengers, it seemed to be going down rather than up, and the built environment emission. There were some of the tables you showed us seem to be correcting, and I wonder where the pushback, the biggest pushback you find, because you're only 3 or 4 in your massive organisation, where are the biggest sort of obstacles for you, for your team are?
Oh, there's a lot in that question. So I suppose I'll start by saying, probably like most of us in this room, we'd all like to go further and faster if we had more resource and money, but we have the constraints that we have in terms of our budgets. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is I feel incredibly blessed with the support I've had from senior officers across the organisation. Certainly, they have shown a lot of willing to be able to support us on this journey. That doesn't mean to say it's not hard. And if you referred to the downward graph around our 2030 challenge, it's going to be hard. I don't think it's currently shown as a sort of straight trajectory. I think there's going to be some lumpiness in that. So from our own perspective, our building emissions is our biggest challenge, and as I suspect it is for most organisations. And we're doing a lot of work at the moment around our decarbonisation strategy across our estate. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about our estate's master plan and thinking about actually what does our estate look like post-COVID and that kind of stuff, like most of organisations have had, so that we can then start to think about what does the decarbonisation of those remaining assets look like. So I'm not surprised we haven't made as much progress as we have so far. I'd like to think we'll see some better traction on that in the years to come, but that will require the right sorts of investments and continued applications to things like the PSDS scheme and SALIX, Low Carbon Skills Fund, and we will continue to look for those sorts of avenues of funding to support us alongside other opportunities. So it is going to be challenging. I'm certainly working with the willing, but it's about identifying those funding opportunities to support us along that journey, I think is what I would say. There are other aspects. You talked about bus passengers, and I think there is more to do in that space. The bus service improvement plan was published this year. There's investment in our net zero buses and that kind of stuff. So I know there's a lot going on in that space. But yeah, clearly there's more to do. Yeah.
Councillor Keithley, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, there's so many facets in that report. There's so much stuff going on. It's actually quite hard to get your head around it all, isn't it? I'm just really interested in a couple of things. First of all, do you know how many people you've got working in Warwickshire County Council in addition to contractors? In addition to your contract staff?
I'm not going to give you
It's
the
about
exact number.
5,000.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I thought ballpark figure 5,000. So I was really interested that you're doing this sustainability survey, actually. I've come out of the quarries and cement industry, Cemex up the road. You know, we had a sustainability department, also very small. Their challenge was to try and get the message out to lots of staff. So I'm interested in how you're going about that and what sort of feedback you got from that. The other thing I'm interested in specifically is if we were to ask members of your staff or team or your senior managers, what's your current score in respect of this whole area? How would they answer that?
Oh, again, there's a lot in there. So, in respect for your first, I guess, where shall I start? So, in terms of what we're doing, staff survey, we did that for the first time last May, and actually we got around about 1,000 responses, which we were really impressed with, because actually that's quite a significant cohort and it compares well to other things that we do. We fully embarked on that process, not really knowing how many people would respond. And part of it we thought would help us gauge who is interested in this space, who's kind of on the journey with us. We also thought by the actual act of surveying people would also help with the behaviour change piece, because it's kind of, well, what's this all about? Kind of, there's an opportunity to educate alongside survey. I think from memory, what that showed us was, you won't be surprised that most people who actually filled in the form were probably already on a journey, because perhaps if they saw it and they weren't, then they wouldn't have filled it in anyway. So of those that didn't, there'll probably be a mixed bag, because some are too busy, some weren't. So where would they put us in terms of our score on this area? It's a good question. And I think it'll be a good question for us to ask when we roll out the survey this year, to see where they think we are on that journey. I couldn't honestly answer that, because I think I speak to a lot of people who are already working in this space, and I think it might not be representative.
No, it is a really interesting area, and it's an interesting concept to try and distill all the things that you're doing into something that you can use as a metric for your measuring your performance, either month by month or quarter by quarter. It's really difficult to find the essential components of something that could relate to a score. So you could say, are you doing better than you did last quarter? And it was, I remember, a really interesting conversation with our sustainability director, who'd been challenged to do just that by our country president, and said, you know, find a way of explaining how we're doing in simple terms, so that people can see whether or not we are moving in the right direction. Because as I said at the beginning, you know, you've just shown us, I don't know how many slides you had up there, but quite a lot. So, you know, it is really hard for most people to get a grasp on that, and also where the biggest levers are to make the biggest changes. And I noticed from one of your early slides that the impact that you'd made in the reduction in emissions from transport is relatively modest compared to some of the other areas. And that would raise a question as to whether or not, in fact, that is a very big lever to pull, but you've got to do a lot of pulling to make a difference, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. Perhaps an interesting conversation to learn a bit more about the experiences in your previous organisation and whether we can take any of those away.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to raise any questions? If I come back, the flooding is, you know, something that, as you mentioned, is of great interest to us in the district council, in the Stratford District Council, and particularly to myself, who comes from Ulster, who's had some major flooding. incidents in the past. I'm just wondering what the relationship is with the Environment Agency. Are you kind of able to meet with them regularly? Are they supportive? And what more can we do as a district council to engage with yourself and the Environment Agency about not only natural flood management but also flood defence type work in the district? Is there anything we can do to? And I notice Councillor Crump on that one as well. Shall I bring you in first, Councillor Crump, and then I'll bring Sarah in afterwards?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, in my portfolio, I think that there's a couple of messages. One, we want to encourage residents to report any type of flooding whenever it happens, so we get a true picture of what is happening. We know the rainfall in the last 18 months has been, to use a well-worn phrase, unprecedented, and springs, particular water courses that have been dormant for many, many years, are starting to spring out, overflow, or whatever phrase you want to use. So, and that's causing new challenges. There's those issues. So we've got a true picture. Reporting actual flooding, particularly into residential, but also business properties, helps us make our case to the Environment Agency and the flood forums, which I attend, the Severn and Wye and the Trent ones, which I attend, and I was at one yesterday online. So I think we need to get those messages across. I think, again, as part of the planning process as well, we need to make sure that we are building the houses in the right place, the implications of runoff and the implication of the effect of water courses as well. And again, I think the issues about riparian ownership, particularly around water courses, ditches and rivers, again, we need to do potentially some enforcement on that. So lots of issues. Natural flood management, yes, I think I know Shipston Flood Action Group do a lot of work, and they work with farmers. And again, this is an opportunity to work with our partners. But there's times where natural flood management and defences involving concrete or different types of material, Cemex concrete, Councillor Keithley, where we have to work in partnership. So lots of things we all know. And at the last flood forum, I went to the Environment Agency. Their funding from the government was proven to be challenging, although in the Severn area they've done better than many other flood forums. So just some updates on that. But yeah, it's a very difficult one, reporting, liaison, because obviously residents sometimes report to the district rather than report to the county. So again, if we can get the message across, and and again get the planning process involved as well. So thank you.
I don't know whether you want to come in on that, but also sustainable urban drainage systems, particularly on some of the private estates, and trying to work out who is responsible for them. Some of them are, nobody knows who's responsible for them, and just wondered whether you've got whether the Environment Agency liaison, but also that maintenance of sustainable urban drainage is something that the county is able to take on.
Thank you. Well, I'll try and add to what Councillor Crump has said, who's probably far more knowledgeable than I am on these things. As it happens, I do know that there's a piece of legislation that we're waiting for around sustainable urban drainage. And I was only speaking to colleagues earlier today, and they're not quite sure where it's going to land. They're nervous that when legislation has landed in this space before, it's been done at quite a last minute, and we've had to respond relatively quickly to that. So I think we've got that on the radar and wanted to understand it better. And also we're actually looking to learn from other parts of the country as well. So we're going up to Mansfield in a month or so's time to have a look at the work that they've done across the town in Mansfield, around primarily around SUDS. If anybody's interested, there's on the Ashton resources, there's a case study around the Mansfield scheme, or equally you can find it, I think, through the Severn Trent route. So a number of us are going up to see what's gone on up there, to see if there's things that we can learn and bring back. But yeah, in terms of responsibility, I think that's one of the things that we need to look at in terms of our proactive piece of work that I mentioned earlier. So there is a piece of work that we're just kicking off that's looking across a number of our services within the organisation, whether it's county highways, whether it's the flood team, engineering design services, adaptation, just to understand actually what's the next steps in terms of the work in this area, and being able to have an obvious link into the district and borough. I don't know whether it would be through our normal climate change teams or whether there's somebody more appropriate who we should perhaps liaise with from an officer perspective.
I think we do need to work together, and we do. But anything that we can do to help and make sure that we tackle this together, I would appreciate. Thank you very much indeed. I really do appreciate you coming in and your presentation. I don't know if anybody's got any other questions. If not, then just thank you so much. We look forward to the slides. I look forward to chasing up on some of the that Ashton Mansfield case study and looking at perhaps some of the other response and just the officers. Ellie, will keep me in touch as well. That's really appreciated that you're keeping it, that she's part of your liaison. Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciated. Thank you. All right. Moving on then, we've got urgent business, and I've received no notice of any urgent business, so thank you very much indeed for coming along today, and that is the end of the meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.